welcome to the Jeff Buller Show. Today I have with me Evan Sohn. Now, Evan is the Chairman and Chief Executive of Recruitercom, an on-demand recruiting platform that combines AI and video job matching technology. And I'm quite curious about the AI part, Evan, so we'll dive into it a little bit later. And has the world's largest network of small independent recruiters. Evan is a frequent contributor to CNBC and Yahoo Finance, and he has expertise in a diverse range of industries, including Wi-Fi, instant messaging, data security, and so on. Beginning with his own mobile computing company in the 1990s, which was later acquired by Dun Bradstreet. That's well done. And Evan has aided a number of venture-backed companies in growing their businesses. These companies have been acquired by the likes of Symantec and Verifone, among others. So welcome to the show, Evan. It's an absolute pleasure.
Thanks so much, Jeff. Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
So I really love the fact that Zoom sort of brought the world together when we needed it. So it's really, really good. And you're next to Manhattan, and I'm in Sydney. And here we are having a chat. I sometimes feel like it'd be great to have a camera outside each other's homes, sort of scanning, showing the neighbourhood. But that maybe get to too much, really. Yeah.
You know, what's interesting is I've been using Zoom for a long time. I was with the Silicon Valley company for a couple of years in the payment space. We got acquired by GoDaddy. And, we were using Zoom then. So we're talking about probably like years sort of all blend, but let's say 2018, something like that. And what was interesting was that in those days, Zoom really was a step up from a phone call. Right? Let's have a video conference call, right? Oh, do you want to have a conference call? No, let's have a video call. And what's happened, I think, because of COVID, is Zoom really became a step down from a face-to-face meeting. There are people now that use Zoom all the time that you actually never see face-to-face. So I find that to be just fascinating. But we can talk about it.
Yeah, I know. Well, I find it fascinating too. What I love about Zoom is its ease of use. It records, like for recording this.
They're a great company. They're actually a client of ours, so okay. I love them. They're great stuff.
All right. Well,
I was on the phone with my folks over at CNBC the other day, and I asked them, I'll be on CNBC. I'm on like once a month talking about the job market, but I've actually been up in their studios, et cetera. And I'm like, is that ever coming back? They're like, never. And it's pretty amazing that the first time I was on CNBC, you'll like this, Jeff. I got a phone call from them. All right, you're going to be on. I'm like, I'm not coming into the studio, right? This is like May of 2020. Like, no, you're not allowed. There are like 6 people in the whole studio. I'm like, okay, so do you send me like a camera? Like, what do is there a crew that meets me outside? And they go like, no, you'll get a phone call from someone from the tech operations. And I get a phone call and they're like, okay, do you have Skype? Yeah. Okay, like go on Skype, click. Do you have any books? Yeah. Can you raise your monitor up a little bit? I'm like, sure. All right, tilt it back, tilt it forward, whatever, a little here. Okay, we're good to go. And it was really amazing because, let's assume that Skype or Zoom in a live audience works 98% of the time, 95% of the time. That's good enough now. Like it's just absolutely good enough, No one you hear a dog barking in the background. No one apologizes anymore. Hey, that's no one's like, excuse me, I'm really sorry. That's my dog. It's like, oh yeah, my dog's here. It's really a fascinating world that we're living in now. So sorry about that. A little musing around there.
Yeah. Well, the other thing that fascinates me is that Skype had this technology and the market all to itself almost.
Yeah.
And dropped and it. You don't. Okay, it used to say, let's go on Skype, right? So Skype almost became a verb, but Zoom's taken that moniker away.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Right place, right time.
Exactly, mate. And I watched a TED Talk recently, and the guy had been behind 200 different startups, and he had analysed what the reason success was behind them, and he came up with 5.
Timing.
It was timing.
Timing. Yeah, I saw that TED Talk. It was great. Timing.
Yeah. And you know what? My whole experience and on reflection with both my career and businesses is if I got my timing wrong, no matter how hard you tried, it's just not going to work. You get your timing right, wow, it's sometimes like a rocket ship. So it's fun.
Yeah, totally agree. Yeah. Totally agree.
All right. So, Evan, let's go back a few years, back to the 1990s. You came out of college, and what sort of degree did you do back in college, Evan?
So it was I was in NYU Business School, and it was a combined double major, computer information systems and management.
Right.
So I'm 54 years old. So it was quite interesting degree then in those days.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
I worked my way through college. I was a programmer, a bad programmer, but I was a programmer nonetheless. And then I took two engineers from that I worked with, and we started our own place like the day after graduation. They were 10 years older than me, et cetera. And we really wanted to focus in mobile computing. So we were in, and my theory was then that the adaptation of mobile in the professional environment will really be through third-party applications.
Right.
So, the individual is using mobile for, a calendar, contact directory, et cetera. And these were programmable, and really saw the opportunity to really be like the prevailing person in, a professional mobile computing stuff.
Right.
So we did like the first wireless email system. My clients were like every major pharmaceutical company. We really captured some very interesting markets, but it got me into lots of different industries all through mobile. Grew the company over a decade. Clients included like Abbott Laboratories, Hoffman LaRoche, NASA, AT&T, American Express, TD Ameritrade I mentioned before, and like many, many others. And we got acquired by Dun Bradstreet in 1998. Stayed there for a little while, got pulled out by a venture capital company to go to a company, and got involved in the security space. So I sort of done what I used to call it the trifecta, was like the new market, new company, new market, new product. And then I've also done like sort of reinventing industry. So in the payment industry, we're sort of reinventing the payment industry for smart payment terminals. So I've just been very, very fortunate to be around like some very, very talented people throughout my career.
Yeah. So it also sounds like timing was also seemed to work in your favor.
Always helps.
Yeah, you always helps. Look, let's step back to the beginning of that mobile company. You said you met people that were 10 years older than you. So how did this idea and also the people you met to get together and form the mobile company? So were they ex-colleagues of yours from business school?
No, just people. They were people that I had worked with. I had a job through college, and these were just people that I worked with. Real
Okay.
hardcore engineers. In
Okay.
the early days of mobile, there was a lot of hardware that went around with mobile. So it was almost, you had to be both software and hardware. So
Yep.
we made like the first, we actually made the first docking station for a mobile device, like back in like 93,
Yep.
like really early on. Like, so we were doing some very, 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 very interesting things with mobile computers back before like what you have now. Like, I'm looking at my shelf of, I have like every handheld ever made from like the dawn of time. And like the early days of like the Apple Newton and those things, like we were part of that whole genre of mobile computing, like very, very early days.
So when you started, the idea, did it come over a beer at the pub? Did it come over like a discussion meeting?
A little ego, thinking like we could do this better than the guys before.
Yep.
And so it was really about that. Also, it was really timing. Sharp Electronics was really being a very dominant player in the handheld space. And then we really built a good relationship with them. And then we became their go-to people. So when they would get a call from the likes of Merck or Bristol Myers Squibb saying, oh, we want a handheld, but we want to do these things, they would say, oh, that sounds really good. Go call up Evan Sohn. And they would call me up, and like we saw opportunities to sort of, we were doing a lot of consulting, and then we productized the things that we were consulting on.
Okay.
And that's really how we evolved the company.
Yep. Because the challenge with the consulting is scalability, isn't it?
Yeah, there's no scalability.
Yeah.
There's no leverage. There's no scalability.
Yeah.
And, either you got to be really good at consulting and charge like, $400 an hour and keep really good tabs on your time, or you leverage it. And we chose to leverage it.
Yeah. And I think it's really important that as entrepreneurs, some people are very happy just being consultants for the rest of their lives. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you want scalability, you've got to productize. Right. Yeah. And that's what you've done. So, all right, cool. So you've sold it to Dun & Bradstreet, so then you moved into what sort of spaces more from there? You did mention it quickly in passing.
Security. I was in security for a little
Right.
while.
Yep. Okay. And were these startups again? Were
Yeah, all
they
startups.
right?
Yeah,
Okay.
startups.
Okay. Is that before startups were not sexy?
What was funny was like I when I started my company, I was 21. And it was at a time where like being 21, you were not the CEO at 21. I actually had a business card that said like director of marketing. Like, no one's going to believe that I'm a CEO. So like I had a card that said director of marketing, which is like very, very funny.
Did you grow your
Um,
beard? Did you grow your beard back then to make yourself
I
look
grew my
older?
beard in, I grew my beard in 94,
Oh, there you go.
93. And that age, so 93, I grew a beard and that
Yeah.
aged me a lot.
Yeah. Okay.
And I actually remember them asking my partner, like someone go, how old's your how old is he? And he would say, old enough. Like it was like, you know, because it was really like this,
Okay.
like no one really, I didn't get married till 94. So
No.
this age, my ring aged me, my beard aged me, so it was just not cool at the time.
Did
So
you
that,
go out
that
and
was,
buy? Did you go out and buy some glasses as well to help with that aging
yeah, I wish,
process?
but it was just not, it was not a thing that was done. It
Yeah. Yeah.
just really wasn't done then.
Yeah.
Certainly at the time. So it was a very, those were exciting times,
Mm.
to be, we were like probably the first transaction in the mobile industry, like the first like acquisition in the mobile industry.
Oh
And
wow.
these things usually come in threes.
Yeah.
You take a new industry and like, okay, the first guy is going to get bought, the second guy will get bought, the third guy will get bought by a lot less. And then that's kind of, it's, and obviously the world's changed a lot,
Mm.
but it was, quite a fascinating time.
So, so you mentioned some interesting phrases like new product, new industry, timing. Do you see sort of startups today? It seems like you see startups in three different lenses. Um, like, what do you mean about like new product, new
Yeah.
industry versus, I suppose,
Yeah. So,
the other one you mentioned was like reinventing an industry. So yeah, that sort of thing I'm talking about.
yeah. So you probably need to look at it as in like, are you asking people to spend new money,
Hmm.
or are you asking them to shift their money? Let's use the word jelly beans, right? Are
Okay.
you asking them to shift their jelly beans to you, or is it a whole new batch of jelly beans? And it's much, much harder to get someone to spend something new.
Yes.
That's a much, and I've done it, and it's really, really hard,
Hmm.
because you need a catalyst. So, for instance, when I was in the security space, um, you know, Michelangelo, like if you remember the antivirus, the virus, Michelangelo really put, this was like 1990, 2005,
Hmm.
really put like antivirus software on the market. Michelangelo came, they shut everyone's systems down for like 2 days. It was a huge thing. And all of a sudden everyone needs to have antivirus and anti-spam. Think about, the actual title chief security officer didn't exist
No.
in the 90s, right?
No.
Came in probably end of 90s. So, Wi-Fi security, network security, these things all started to evolve. And so you have to have a budget, right? In other words, it's much, much easier to say to someone, well, what's your budget for X? Great, go spend it with me. So we used to joke around when I was doing payments, like you wanted a smart application for a business owner would be one button says make you money, the other one says save you money, like, because that's all that they actually really care about. So you kind of have to look at it that way. When you reinvent an industry, now you're actually coming in and saying, all right, however you've been doing and spending money, I'm going to change the way you're actually doing that. So for instance, my company in the 90s, let's go back to mobile. One of our wireless email system, I used to call it my $50,000 wireless email system because only I used it. It was we built it. It was very, very expensive to build and no one cared. Right? Because no one was doing email then, right? So if you weren't doing, like I remember landing on an airplane, we landed and I opened up my antenna and I was checking my email on my handheld and someone's like, what are you doing? I'm like, I'm checking my email. They're like, why would you want to do that? Now, of course, in 2022, how can you even think that there was a time before where you didn't check your email every 13 seconds? But in those days, it just didn't happen. So we were, think about how long that actually took to evolve, where email became so pervasive. But the industry that we did automate really successfully was the pharmaceutical sales force automation,
Right.
pharmaceutical sales forces.
Yep.
So in the U.S., when a pharmaceutical sales rep leaves a prescription drug for a doctor, they have to capture the doctor's signature, right? It's as if they were writing a prescription, you capture a signature. Well, that was all paper based, and they were, I remember walking to a warehouse. There were, acres of these sample cards, just all these cards, all paper based. And we came in there and said, all right, let's automate that whole thing. And we came in there and mobilized that whole industry really within like 2 years, 3 years. It's pretty cool. And so the money that they were spending on sample cards and people to pull the card, there was all this money being spent, and they were spending lots of money on laptop computers to give out to the reps. Meanwhile, they only wanted to capture certain information. So we really became a cost savings for them. They took out all this cost. It's much, much easier to reinvent an industry when you're taking cost out than saying, hey, I'm going to make you spend money on something new.
Yeah. You mentioned wireless, and I noticed that you've been involved in Wi-Fi, because I remember back in the late 80s and early 90s, before the advent of 3G, which I think was the start of being able to use mobile networks for data. Is that correct? I think 3G was the start of data-driven mobile networks. But Wi-Fi, disconnecting people from their desks, it was really important. So how are we involved with Wi-Fi? Because I believe actually Wi-Fi that was actually created by an Australian inventor a long time ago, I think, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, so Wi-Fi was really interesting. I was in the Wi-Fi security space.
Right.
So what you start to see happen is that, companies you'd have these rogue wireless networks, right? You had Linksys and Recom and Aerotech. So Cisco bought a company called Aerotech, and that's what really propelled Wi-Fi. You also wasn't called Wi-Fi then; it was called 802.11, which was really the standard, the IEEE standard of 802.11, 802.11a, 802.11b, 802.11c, 802.11n. All these 802.11s. Wi-Fi was the moniker, code name for it. And you start to see companies say, hey, look, we're going to have Wi-Fi. Laptops started to include a Wi-Fi in their computer, or you had a Wi-Fi card. I probably have one on my desk somewhere, a Wi-Fi card. So you start to see these things sort of evolve. And then security came out of them, because how can you allow this? And 802.11g and roaming and all those other things that we all take for granted now that just sort of happen on their own.
Yeah.
I remember I have a tri-band phone that actually has, wide area, wide area network, local.
A WAN.
Yeah, so these were all things that were happening. And remember, in the 90s, you actually saw handoffs in cell carriers also. You think about, you had your cellular service, and if you went from a different zone, you had roaming, right? You actually had roaming between network, like there's a whole, and it's pretty incredible how it's all sort of evolved over the last bunch of years. But yeah, I was involved in a company called Reef Edge, REEFEDGE. I got a tombstone around there someplace. Venture-backed company, just the smartest people, involved. There was just pretty fascinating stuff a long time ago.
Yeah. Well, some of the stuff that you brought up just sort of like took me back in time to, intranets, and like you said, WANs and LANs. So it's, we take Wi-Fi for granted now, like the fact that we're constantly on. If we go into the country and don't get a signal, you almost feel like you're disconnected from the world now.
Right. I was talking to someone about e-commerce, and, what's funny was that PayPal, if you recall, and, you're an old guy also, PayPal was really started for people who wanted, aside from the fact that they had morphed their company a few different times, PayPal, you really started to use PayPal as opposed to putting your own credit card on an e-commerce site to buy a widget. You signed up for PayPal, you had your credit card with PayPal, and they were sort of the broker, because you wouldn't want to give your credit card, to just some other e-commerce site. We had no problem swiping it at a gas station or handing it to a 20-year-old waiter at a restaurant, having them walk away with it. But, God forbid we put it into a website with PayPal.
Yeah.
And what's funny is, we were so nervous about that years ago, and now you get angry, like, I can't believe Amazon recommended that book to me. What are they, crazy? You know, like, don't they know me already? How, you know, so it's funny. We've just come this, 180 in such a very short period of time in terms of privacy of information.
I know it's crazy. So what I love you mentioned about the startup scene was, one, you either create a new industry, but the trouble with that is actually trying to get budgets, because there's no budget set aside for new products that no one's ever heard of or didn't even think they needed. Then the other one you mentioned was actually essentially disrupting an industry, essentially, or taking over an industry. So let's go fast forward to Recruiter.com. Okay, can you hear me well?
Yep, hear you fine.
Okay, back to headphones. Okay, so what that is very, very interesting is that we were talking about Wi-Fi, how important it is, and my Wi-Fi went off in the house and went actually on the 5G network here. All right, so the question I think was Recruiter.com. So what was the inspiration for Recruiter.com?
About 3 years ago, I was looking to do something different, and I called up an investor friend of mine who has a fund, and I said to him, look, I want to get involved in a public company. I want to be involved in a small public company and use my skills and talents to sort of help them evolve and take them to the next level, et cetera. So I got introduced to what's now Recruiter.com 3 years ago, first as a consultant, sort of helping. The company really was a media company. A lot of, 3.5 million social media touch points. It's got a magazine, a periodical, articles, LinkedIn profiles, all this other stuff, 48,000 Twitter followers. And my goal really was to take this media company and turn it into a tech platform, a transactional tech platform.
Yep.
So we did a transaction, we raised some money. I became chairman of the board in March of 2019. And then really at the height of the pandemic, I became its CEO. We raised more money, got onto NASDAQ this past July.
Right.
So, and now Recruiter.com really is an on-demand tech platform, helping companies of all sizes hire talent through either our global network of independent recruiters. Think of it as like Uber for recruiting, or we have our own software, our own AI-backed software to help companies build talent pools and candidates, et cetera. So, and we use them together.
Okay, so you're basically an aggregator of independent recruiters.
Yeah.
Yep. And you use your platform to actually aggregate them and then provide talent for them that they can on-sell. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. So our client is usually either the CEO or a hiring manager at a company. So right. Either they're sophisticated, they know what they need. Company needs 100 of this, 200 of this, 50 of this, 20 of this. We typically don't do executive level. We're not doing the chief, we're not doing the CEO, but yep. We'll do, 100 financial analysts, back office, whatever they need. Mm-hmm. And typically these companies either need candidates, right? They've tried ZipRecruiter, LinkedIn, Indeed, whatever, and now they need something more proactive. They use our tools, or they need recruiters, in-house recruiters paid by the hour, not based on success only, or they need both.
Yep. So the idea came out of you wanting to get involved with a small publicly traded company. Was that, and you went looking for that? Is that correct?
Yeah. I went looking for, what would be interesting for me to get involved with, and this investor is like, you got to check out this, company Recruiter.com. And I'm like, if you have a company called Recruiter.com that's not worth $1 billion, there's a problem, and let's go solve that problem. And so it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah. So in terms of the challenges of any companies, number one is you can build the technology. That's always a challenge. Number two, because it's basically quite often startups get involved in, they end up being in two big battles. In other words, a battle for technology supremacy, another one a battle for market supremacy. So in terms of growing, what are some of the things that, how have you grown Recruiter.com?
So it's a great question. I think I always joke around, we're like the opposite of every company ever created. Every company spends their early days looking to have a product market fit. Like, what market are we in? What market should we be in? We're Recruiter.com, right? So we know who our market is. We're a market of recruiters. We're a destination site for recruiters. That'd be like hotels.com saying, well, what market are we in? Duh, you're in the market of hotels, right? You provide people access to hotels. You don't go to realtor.com to find a plumber. You go to realtor.com to find a home, a realtor, whatever you need. We're recruiter.com. We're not no recruiter.com. We're not without recruiter.com. We are recruiter.com. So we know what our market is. And what we really did was experiment. I use that word a lot. Really experiment with, all right, what does our audience need? What does our market need? What do we have more demand for? What's our supply like, et cetera? And the reality is that, whenever you build a marketplace, you either focus on, demand or supply. You can't focus on both. It's too expensive. Yep. So Uber, right? They focus on drivers. Yep. Uber does not focus on Evan and Jeff. They focus on drivers.
Yep.
They acquired us through a very simple $10 referral fee program, whatever they ran in Sydney, Australia. But, their goal was to have this tremendous supply of drivers. So whenever there's a demand, they could fill that supply. If you look at every marketplace, it's really one or the other. We have this incredible supply of recruiters. We have incredible AI software. We have incredible demand, and we really focus on delivery. That's really what we focus on. How do we get the right recruiter at the right company, or how do we enable our tools for the right company? And that's really what we focus on a lot.
So you focus on the hardest market first, which is actually getting the recruiters. In other words, just like Uber did, focus on getting drivers. Is that correct?
Yeah. So we have a great supply. The difference is that I think the segmentation that you're seeing in recruiting is even greater than it used to be, right? Yep. It used to just be, and again, recruiting looks a little bit more like law than anything else, right? You're in Sydney, Australia. If you were looking to do a real estate transaction in Sydney, you wouldn't get a real estate lawyer from New Zealand. You get one from Sydney, right? So it's not just someone that knows real estate. It's got to know real estate in my area, in my zone. And I think recruiting really takes more of that level. I need someone who's actually going to be talked to the candidates in their language, whatever they're looking for, et cetera. So we do that. And our software is really, really kick-ass software that we have. We've invested millions of dollars into our software. We have over 170 million profiles now in our software. Wow. Full AI searching and engagement tools to get, to really build candidate pools for companies. So it's very exciting how we put all this together for our clients.
So in other words, you've created a platform that reduces the friction.
Yeah, that's right. Recruit talent faster and better. It's probably, the tagline that we would use.
Has that been one of the biggest challenges, just trying to make the interface and UI actually really low friction and easy to use? Has that been your biggest one? Which a lot of complex technology sits behind.
There's a lot of complex technology. You need to make sure it works. It's scalable. It's easy to use for the right people. It's delivering the results it wants. I think the challenge today is that, if a company, if you're looking to hire an assistant and you're only willing to pay them $8 an hour, you're not going to get anyone, right? So there's this sense that you got to make sure that the company, that the offer to the actual individual is worth it as well.
Yeah.
Right. Uber doesn't do name your own price travel, right? It's not, hey, I want to go from point A to point B and I only want to pay $5. It doesn't work like that. In fact, the opposite, they have surge pricing when it needs to cost more. And we've become accustomed to those things. And I think that in talent acquisition, the challenge now is, hey, look, it's difficult for us to say, hey, Jeff, we're gonna find you people, right? We're gonna get people to raise their hand saying, I'm interested in working for Jeff. But if they don't want to work for you because you're not a good guy or you're not paying enough money, there's just so much that we can do. But look, we've been very fortunate that our customer satisfaction is very high. Our repeat customers are very high. Our recurring revenue is great. We grew over 40% between Q3 and Q4. So we're doing really, really well. I'm very, very pleased. Yep. And we've also, one of our priorities was really to build an A+ company, an A+ virtual company. And we continue to do that. We have a great team, not just management team, but, top and bottom, the entire company is just really fantastic people.
Yeah. The big buzzword for the last few years has been AI. So how do you use AI in very simple terms in your technology to help recruiters?
Yeah. So AI for us, a lot of AI really is, and we've trained our AI, but if you're looking for a software engineer, Okay, but you don't really want a software engineer, because in some companies they call it a coder, and some answers they call it a senior engineer. But a senior engineer for one company might be an entry level engineer for another. So AI really sits there and says, what are you really looking for? We also have a new feature, like, call it like, clone. Like, gee, I want to hire someone that looks just like Jeff. So go find me everyone that looks like Jeff. And so there's a lot of AI there too. But it's so for us, that's really what AI really is like, what are you looking for, but what are you really looking for? Right. So, the best example is like a vice president at one company could be a managing director at another. Yep. And they could be a direct, there's a whole article that Facebook gives very, very low titles. Other companies give very high titles. So you need AI to sort of go between and figure it out, et cetera.
Yeah. So in your entrepreneurial journey, Evan, what are some of the mentors and resources that have helped you along the way?
So I had a phenomenal mentor back in the early 2000s. Phenomenal gentleman, Christopher Brody, just a phenomenal individual. He told me something that I use it all the time. I had a meeting with him, and I brought a deck, and we walked through the deck. And he goes to me, "Do you value our time together?" I said, "Of course I do." He goes, "Obviously you don't, because if you really did, you would have emailed me the deck, and then we could have spent an hour talking about the deck rather than you spending the first, half an hour walking me through the deck." So it was like a very good lesson in terms of like, making sure that you're, leveraging people along the way. But really, I've met some very exciting people. You got to be learning. I always tell my kids there's something to learn from everybody, and if you haven't figured it out yet, you haven't dug enough. I read a lot. Mm-hmm. So I just finished Extreme Ownership, so by Jocko, the former Navy SEAL. Like, I've done a lot of these reading books and stuff like that. So I've just been very fortunate to have some really interesting people. Silicon Valley has some really great people there too. Just really great people along the way.
Yeah. I think a lot of people don't value how important books are. For me, a book is a distillation of decades of experience and expertise just put into a few hundred pages, and that takes a lot of effort. So Stephen King calls a book a time machine. It takes people back and takes people forward.
You know what? I'd rather learn your mistake than make one on my own, right?
Exactly.
If you made a mistake, it certainly makes sense to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I know Warren Buffett reads almost. I think Warren Buffett, Bill Gates, they spend most of their morning reading. Uh-huh. And the thing about, I think, is that I see reading sometimes as a guilty pleasure because I enjoy reading so much. So I feel like when I'm reading, I'm not working, because working's supposed to be hard, right?
Yeah.
And enjoyable. So, just to wrap it up here, Evan, what are some of the most important things you've learned along the way that you'd like to share with our viewers and listeners?
All right. So I would probably say, I have a series of rules that I like to live by when it comes to work. And I think they're very, very focusing. So the first rule is, never do anything you're being measured, never do anything you're not being measured against. Mm-hmm. And part of that really is that we all love to be distracted. Yeah. Right. So I was going down this one path and there were distractions, and you wake up and you're like, yeah, but because distraction is usually much easier to do.
Yeah.
It's much easier to do a distraction than it is to actually do your objective. Mm-hmm. And you wake up and you sort of feel short term, I had this nice distraction. Feel so good. I solved someone else's problem for them. But at the end of the day here, I'm not being measured by that. Mm-hmm. So, if you think about your own self, I didn't hit any of my targets, but look at these nice distractions I had throughout the year. So the real focusing thing there is really focus yourself and your people on never do anything that you're not being measured against. And obviously I'm generalizing, but to prove a point, like get very, very focused on, what are you being measured against, et cetera.
Yeah.
And I think that that really carries itself in other rules, right? Go into a meeting with one objective, not 19, and everyone always goes in with like, here are the 8 things we want to cover. Well, if you have 8 things that you want to cover, that means you have nothing to cover. What's the one thing that you want to accomplish in that meeting? Get very, very focused on that one thing. And it should be the thing you're being measured against. And then finally, I would say that, one of my big mantras at work is I want to be a client's first phone call.
Yep.
I don't care what industry. And I got this from my CEO at Verifone. I loved it. I want to be your first phone call. And they've actually heard me on the phone with like clients saying, was I your first phone call? Or I want to be your first phone call.
Okay.
Why? Because, when you're going to have a problem, I want you to call me first. I want you to come and treat me like that we're in confidence with each other. We're partners, right? You don't call your gas station first. Who cares where you fill up your tank? It doesn't make a difference. But a partner is someone who go, Jeff, I have a problem. Help me out with my problem. I want to bounce something off you. And if you're in a relationship where your client is calling you first, that's really that's the relationship you want to have. I'm your first phone call to solve your problem. And I don't care what industry you're in. It doesn't make a difference, because we're all sort of commodities at some level or another, because there are other people doing what we do. But if you are a client's first phone call, that now sets you apart from everyone else there. And you want to maintain that relationship. And by the way, ask the client, was I your first phone call? I want to be your first phone call. How do I make sure I'm your first phone call? Yeah. And you learn a lot in the payment industry, where there's so many competitors in that space. Being a company's first phone call, and in the recruiting industry, the talent acquisition industry is $76 billion in the US. It's a giant, huge industry, huge. So what's the difference between, the big guys, Korn Ferry, Heidrick & Struggles, Robert Half, these are all huge companies, Russell Reynolds, Manpower, Adecco, Hudson. They're all these giant companies, is that someone's built a relationship with a client. And if you could be that person, if you can have that, be that client first phone call, that's really going to set you apart.
So what's Recruiter.com's number one big thing that sets them apart?
Our software is fantastic. Our software is really, I think, the cat's meow, and really going to be that thing that enables companies to really acquire candidates and acquire talent in a world where that's so hard to do. And we're seeing success today with companies that need mechanics, to companies that need drivers, to companies that need Java developers, licensed therapists, recruiters, you name it. And when you start seeing that diverse population of what we're able to deliver through our software, it's just really, really incredible.
So you're managing basically, literally thousands, almost millions of niches just done with technology. That's
right. All the technology, and then an army of recruiters, really just an absolute army of independent recruiters on demand, working for companies on a daily basis.
Yeah. It's fascinating, but I think software, I heard a term the other day, and which is saying that software, we underrate the power of software to change your life or add value to your life. And it's all done behind the scenes by incredible complex technology, but at the front end, it looks simple, just like using Uber, and obviously it sounds like just by using Recruiter.com.
Oh, fantastic. I couldn't have said any better, so thank you very much.
Well, thank you for your time, Evan. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you, Jeff.
I've learned so much, and I always do when I talk to some of the smartest tools in the shed around the world, and just fabulous creative entrepreneurs such as yourself, because I'm always amazed by the creativity of all the smart, intelligent, creative entrepreneurs that I meet, such as yourself. So thank you for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure, Evan.
Really appreciate it, Jeff, and let's catch up again in not too long, okay?
All right, look forward to that, and even maybe catching up in Manhattan one day.
There you go.